The glove fell from Yoren Vane's hand without his noticing. A single piece of worn leather swallowed by fresh snow on the narrow mountain pass. And Gretta Bane watched it happen from 200 yards upslope, with the stillness of someone who had learned to make herself invisible against stone and sky. She had been checking her trap line, moving through the high country with the economy of motion that came from a lifetime in thin air and bitter cold. The human surveyor had passed below her position 3 times in the last week, always alone, always measuring angles with his brass instruments and marking notes in a leather-bound book. She had not approached him. Her people did not approach humans when it could be avoided, and she had no particular reason to break that sensible rule. But when the glove tumbled from his pack, and he continued walking, oblivious, she found herself descending the slope. The leather was good quality, lined with rabbit fur, the kind of thing a man working in winter needed to keep his fingers functional. She picked it up, brushed the snow away, and looked down the pass where the surveyor had already rounded a bend and disappeared. Returning it would have been simple. She could have called out or hurried after him, or left it on a rock where he would retrace his steps and find it. Instead, Gretta tucked the glove inside her coat and went back to her traps. She kept it on the shelf above her bed in the small stone hut she had built into the mountainside, where it sat among her few possessions like something that did not belong. Each evening she looked at it and told herself she would return it the next day. Each morning she left it where it was and went about her work. The glove became a small secret, a piece of foolishness she did not entirely understand. She was 23 years old, had lived alone in the high country for 5 years since her mother died, and had never kept something that did not serve a purpose. The glove served no purpose. She already had gloves, thick ones she had made herself from elk hide. This one was too small for her hands anyway, but she kept it. 2 weeks passed before she saw the surveyor again. She had descended to the trading post at the base of the pass, a rough collection of buildings where trappers and hunters came to sell pelts and buy supplies. The post served everyone, human and orc alike, because the owner cared more about coin than about old hatreds. Gretta was loading smoked meat and salt into her pack when she saw him through the window, standing at the counter with his back to her. He was not a large man by human standards, perhaps a few inches short of 6 feet, with dark hair that needed cutting and the kind of lean build that came from constant work rather than natural strength. His coat was travel-worn but well-maintained, and when he turned to leave, she saw a face that was neither handsome nor plain, just quiet and serious, with gray eyes that looked like they spent a lot of time studying distant things. He wore only one glove. Gretta watched him go, her heart doing something complicated in her chest that she did not have words for. She finished her business at the post and started back up the mountain, and halfway home she stopped walking and stood in the middle of the snowy trail for a full minute, thinking. Then she turned around and went back down. She found him making camp in a sheltered hollow just off the main pass, building his fire with the careful precision of someone who had done it 1,000 times. His instruments were arranged on a flat rock, protected from the wind by his body as he worked. He did not notice her approach until she was 15 feet away, and when he looked up his hand moved toward the knife at his belt, then stopped when he saw what she was. Gretta raised her empty hands, a gesture of peace. "I am not here to cause trouble." The surveyor studied her for a long moment. His expression did not change much, but she saw him take in her appearance. Green skin, small tusks, pointed ears, the willowy frame that made her tall by orc standards but not imposing. She wore her dark hair in a single braid, and her clothes were practical, layered leather and wool that had seen hard use. "Did not think you were," he said finally, His voice was quiet, almost flat, but not unfriendly. "Cold night to be traveling. I live in the high country. Every night is cold." She gestured toward his hand. "You are missing a glove." He glanced down at his bare left hand, then back at her. "Lost it a few weeks ago. Careless. I found it." Something shifted in his expression, a slight loosening around the eyes that might have been relief. "That is fortunate. For me, anyway." Greta reached into her coat and pulled out the glove. She did not offer it to him. Instead, she held it up between them, watching his face. "I will trade you." "Trade?" He sounded puzzled. "For what? It is already mine." "The other one." The surveyor blinked. For the first time, something like confusion crossed his features. "You want to trade the glove I lost for the one I still have?" "Yes." "That makes no sense. Then I would still only have one glove and you would have the other." "Yes," Greta said again. She felt a strange lightness in her chest, as though she had stepped off a cliff and discovered she could float. "That is the trade." He was quiet for a long time, looking at her with those gray eyes that seemed to see more than they should. Then, to her surprise, one corner of his mouth moved upward, not quite a smile but close. "You are not making any sense. I know." "Why would you want my other glove?" She had asked herself that question a dozen times and had no answer that made any sense, so she told him the truth. "I do not know." The surveyor considered this. Then he pulled off his right glove and held it out to her. "Yoren Vane." "What? My name? If we are going to make a senseless trade, I should probably know who I am making it with." Greta took the glove and her fingers brushed his. His hand was cold. "Gretta Bane." "Pleased to meet you, Gretta Bane." He accepted the other glove from her and pulled it on. "Now I can write without my fingers freezing off." "You write a great deal, survey work, measuring the land, marking it for maps." He gestured at his instruments. "Hired by the territorial office to chart this region before spring." Something cold that had nothing to do with the weather touched Greta's spine. "Why?" "They are planning a road. Need to know the best route." He said it casually, as though it were nothing important. Greta looked at the glove in her hands, feeling its weight. "Where does this road go?" "Up through the pass, then along the valley to the east, connecting the settlements." Yoren was building his fire again, not looking at her. "Supposed to make travel easier, help bring more people into the territory. The Eastern Valley." Greta's voice sounded strange in her own ears. "That is winter ground." "What? For my people?" "The valley is where we gather in the coldest months. The game is better there, more shelter from the worst storms. If you bring a road through, bring human settlements, there will be no winter ground." She was still holding his glove, gripping it too tightly. "We will have nowhere to go." Yoren had gone very still. The fire crackled between them, new flames catching on dry wood. When he looked up at her, his expression was complicated. "I did not know that." No one asked. "No." He was quiet again, that stillness that seemed to be his natural state. "No, I suppose they would not." Greta should have left then. Should have thrown both gloves at him and gone back to her mountain, back to her traps and her solitude, and her life that did not include humans who drew lines on maps that erased her people. Instead, she tucked his glove inside her coat next to the first one and sat down on the opposite side of the fire. "May I share your fire for a while? The walk back is long." Yoren looked at her, and something in his face was very careful. "You can share it." They sat in silence while the night deepened around them. Greta watched the surveyor work, writing notes by firelight in his precise, cramped hand. His fingers must have been cold again now, but he did not complain. Every so often he would look up at the stars, calculating something she did not understand, then write some more. "How long have you been doing this?" she asked finally. "Surveying? 6 years. Started as an assistant, learned the trade." He did not look up from his book. "It is good work, quiet." "You like quiet." "I do." Now he did look at her, and she saw something like humor in his gray eyes. Most people talk too much. I do not talk much, I noticed. Gretta felt a smile tug at her mouth, the first real one in longer than she could remember. How long will you be here? In the pass, through winter. The survey needs to be complete before the spring thaw. He closed his book and wrapped it carefully in oilcloth. I have a cabin 2 miles south of here, working my way north, measuring as I go. I know the cabin, the old trapper's shelter. That is the one. Roof barely keeps out the snow, but it is warmer than a tent. He fed another stick to the fire. You said you live in the high country. Where? Another 2 miles above your cabin, stone hut built into the mountainside. She pulled her coat tighter against the cold. I trap mostly. Fox, marten, sometimes elk when I can bring one down. Trade the pelts at the post. Alone. Yes. Yoren nodded slowly as though this made perfect sense to him. That is very quiet. It is. They sat together until the fire burned low, speaking occasionally but mostly just existing in the same space. It should have been uncomfortable, sitting with a stranger, with a human, with someone whose work threatened everything her people had. But it was not uncomfortable. It was, Gretta thought, the strangest thing that had happened to her in a very long time. When she finally stood to leave, Yoren stood as well. Will I see you again? I do not know. Maybe. I will be here through winter, he said, if you want to make another trade. Gretta touched the gloves through her coat, feeling their shape. What would we trade? We can figure that out when the time comes. She left him there by his dying fire and climbed back toward her home through the darkness. And when she lay down to sleep that night, she placed both gloves on the shelf where one had been, perfectly paired, and thought about gray eyes and quiet voices, and the way he had given her his glove without questioning the senselessness of it. The next time she saw Yoren Vane, 5 days had passed, and the mountains had buried themselves in a fresh snowstorm that turned the world white and howling. Gretta had stayed in her hut for 2 days, waiting out the worst of it, and when the wind finally dropped to something survivable, she went to check her trap line. She found the surveyor halfway up the pass, standing in snow to his knees, trying to set up his measuring instruments in the wind. He had wrapped cloth around his face and hands, but she could see him shaking even from a distance. Gretta made her way to him, moving through the snow with the ease of long practice. He saw her coming and lowered his equipment, waiting. This is a bad idea, she called over the wind. I need the measurements. His voice was muffled by the cloth, but she heard the stubbornness in it. You need to not freeze to death. The storm will clear soon. I can work fast. Gretta looked at the sky, reading the clouds the way her mother had taught her. There is another front coming. You have maybe 2 hours before it gets worse. Yoren looked where she was looking, then back at his instruments, then at her. She could see him weighing something in his mind, loyalty to his work against survival. Finally, he started packing his equipment away. Your hut or my cabin? Mine is closer. They climbed together through the worsening weather, Gretta breaking trail and Yoren following in her footsteps with his heavy pack of instruments. By the time they reached her hut, the wind was screaming again and visibility had dropped to almost nothing. She pulled him inside and shut the door against the storm, and they stood in the sudden dimness, breathing hard. The hut was small, barely 10 feet across, carved partially into the mountain itself with stone walls she had built by hand. A fire pit occupied the center, vented through a gap in the roof. Furs covered the sleeping platform along one wall, and her few possessions hung from pegs or sat on shelves. It was spare and functional and entirely hers. Gretta built up the fire while Yoren set down his pack and unwrapped the cloth from his face. His lips were blue with cold. She handed him a blanket and he took it without comment, wrapping it around his shoulders and sitting close to the growing flames. Thank you, he said after a while. You should not have been up there. I know. He held his hands toward the heat, flexing his fingers, trying to stay on schedule. The territorial office wants the survey by first thaw. They will not get it if you die in a storm. Fair point. Gretta hung a pot of snow over the fire to melt for tea. Outside, the wind hammered at the hut, but the stone walls held firm. This was what she had built her home for, to be a place that could withstand the mountain's worst moods. She had never shared it with another person before. "This is good work," Yoren said, looking around. "The stonework very solid. I had time to do it right, and no one to tell me to hurry. How long did it take? The first winter after my mother died. I needed a project, something to keep me from thinking too much." She added tea leaves to the pot, watching them swirl in the heating water. "It gave me something to do besides grieve." Yoren was quiet for a moment. "I am sorry about your mother. It was 5 years ago. The sickness that came through the winter grounds took a lot of the old ones." Gretta poured tea into 2 wooden cups and handed him one. "She taught me to trap, to read weather, to survive up here, so she is still with me in a way." He accepted the tea, warming his hands on the cup. "My father taught me surveying. He died 3 years ago. Heart gave out in the middle of a job. Do you think of him when you work, every day?" Yoren sipped the tea, steam rising around his face. He would have liked these mountains, challenging terrain. They drank in silence for a while, listening to the storm. Gretta found herself studying him in the firelight, the way he held himself with that careful stillness, the economy of his movements. He did not fidget or fill silence with empty words. She appreciated that. "Where are my gloves?" he asked suddenly, and she saw that small, almost smile again. Gretta pointed to the shelf above her sleeping platform. "There." Yoren looked, and his expression did something she could not quite read. The 2 gloves sat side by side, arranged with more care than made any sense. "You are keeping them together. They are a pair. It seems wrong to separate them. But neither of us can wear them if they are both here. No, this is still a very strange trade, Gretta Bane." She felt warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. "I know." The storm kept them in the hut for the rest of that day and through the night. They talked occasionally, long stretches of quiet punctuated by short exchanges about work, about the mountains, about small things that did not matter much. Gretta made a stew from dried meat and roots, and they ate together while the wind screamed outside. When darkness came, she offered him the sleeping platform and took the floor herself, layering furs to keep warm. "This is your home," Yoren protested. "I should take the floor. You are the guest, and you were half frozen. You need the better rest." He looked like he wanted to argue more, but exhaustion won out. He climbed onto the platform and was asleep within minutes, his breathing evening out into the slow rhythm of deep rest. Gretta lay by the fire, watching shadows move on the stone walls, and thought about how strange it was to have another person in her space, how strange that it did not feel wrong. In the morning, the storm had passed, leaving the world buried in fresh snow. Yoren helped her dig out the door, and they stood together in the clear, cold air, looking at the transformed landscape. "I should get back to my cabin," he said. "Check that the roof held. It probably did not. That storm was fierce." He sighed. "Probably not." Gretta made a decision. "I will come with you. If you need repairs, I know how to fix a roof." They walked together down the mountain, following the route she had broken the day before, now filled in with new snow. The cabin was where she remembered it, a rough structure built years ago by a trapper who had long since moved on. The roof had partially collapsed under the weight of snow, and the interior was a mess of wet wood and ice. Yoren stood looking at the damage, his expression carefully blank. "Well, that is not ideal. No. It will take me days to fix this properly, days I should be spending on the survey." Gretta walked around the cabin, assessing the damage. The walls were sound and the frame was still good. The roof was the main problem and she had fixed roofs before. I can help. It will go faster with 2 people. You have your own work. The traps can wait a few days. My line is set well enough. He looked at her, and she saw something complicated in his gray eyes. Why are you helping me? Gretta had been asking herself the same question since she first picked up his glove in the snow. She still did not have a good answer, so she said what was true even if it was not the whole truth. Because you need help, and I can give it. They worked together for 3 days, clearing snow, replacing damaged beams, weaving new thatch for the roof. Yoren had some skill with repairs but was clearly not a builder by trade. Gretta found herself taking the lead, showing him how to layer the thatch properly, how to seal gaps against the wind. He followed her instructions without complaint, working steadily even when his hands were raw from the cold and rough wood. On the 3rd evening, with the roof finally solid again, they sat inside by the small stove Yoren had set up, eating bread and cheese from his supplies. I owe you for this, he said. The work you did. I could not have managed it alone or not as well. Then we are even. You would have frozen on the pass if I had not brought you to my hut. Fair. He broke off a piece of bread and chewed it slowly. Still, thank you. You are welcome. Outside, night was falling, turning the snow blue in the fading light. Gretta should have gone back to her own hut, but she found herself reluctant to leave. The cabin felt warm now, safe, and Yoren's quiet presence was becoming something she looked forward to rather than tolerated. Can I ask you something? Yoren said after a while. Yes. Why do you live alone? I mean, I understand wanting solitude, but you are young, skilled. You could live with your people, have community. Gretta wrapped her arms around her knees, thinking. After my mother died, I tried. Went to the winter grounds, stayed with my mother's sister and her family. But everything there reminded me of what I had lost. And people kept trying to take care of me, make decisions for me, treat me like I was still a child. I needed space to figure out who I was without my mother, so I came up here. Do you get lonely? Sometimes. But it is better than being surrounded by people and still feeling alone. She glanced at him. Do you get lonely? You work alone, travel alone. Sometimes, he echoed, but I prefer solitude to bad company, and I have never been good at the kind of talking people seem to expect. Small words about nothing. I would rather say nothing until I have something worth saying. I understand that. They sat together in comfortable silence, and Gretta realized that this was what she had been missing in her solitude, not constant company, but the right company. Someone who understood that quiet was not empty, that stillness could be its own form of communication. I should go, she said finally, though she did not move. You could stay, if you want. Storm might come back tonight. She looked at the window, reading the sky. It will not. But you could stay anyway. Gretta met his eyes and something passed between them, an acknowledgement of what was growing here. I could. So she stayed, and they talked late into the night, words coming easier now. Yoren told her about growing up in a small town 2 territories south, about learning surveying from his father, about the quiet satisfaction of measuring the world and putting it down on paper. Gretta told him about her mother's stories, about learning to read the mountain's moods, about the first time she brought down an elk by herself and felt truly capable. They discovered small compatibilities. Both preferred winter to summer, silence to noise, work to idleness. Both had lost parents and carried that loss in similar ways, not as constant grief, but as a steady awareness of absence. Both had chosen solitary lives not from hatred of people, but from love of the quiet spaces between them. When Gretta finally left, well past midnight, she walked back to her hut through snow that glittered under stars, and her chest felt full of something she had not experienced in a very long time. Something like happiness, but more complicated. Something like hope, but threaded through with uncertainty. The gloves sat on her shelf, paired and waiting, and she thought about the road Yoren was surveying, the road that would destroy the winter grounds, and wondered how something that felt so right could be built on something so wrong. Winter deepened, and Gretta saw Yoren more often. Not every day, but regularly enough that she began to anticipate his presence, to listen for his footsteps in the snow. Sometimes she would go to his cabin and find him working on his maps, and she would sit and do her own work, mending traps or preparing pelts, both of them comfortable in the shared silence. Other times he would appear at her hut with some excuse, a question about the terrain or an offer to share food, and they would end up talking for hours. The glove trade became a running joke between them. Every few weeks, Gretta would bring both gloves to Yoren's cabin and offer to trade them back, one for the other, and he would solemnly accept the exchange. Then, a week later, he would show up at her hut and propose the opposite trade, and she would agree with equal seriousness. The gloves traveled back and forth between them, never worn, never truly owned by either one, an excuse to see each other that they both knew was an excuse but kept up anyway. "This is ridiculous," Yoren said one evening in late winter, holding both gloves in his lap. "We have traded these things a dozen times now." 13, Gretta corrected. "This was the 13th trade, 13 times, and neither of us has functioning gloves because of it. You could just keep them, wear them, that would be the practical thing. I could." He looked at her gray eyes reflecting firelight. "But then we would have to find a new excuse." An excuse for what? To see each other. Gretta's heart did something complicated. "We do not need an excuse. No, I want to see you anyway, gloves or no gloves." Yoren set the gloves aside carefully, placing them on the small table between them. "Good, because I want to see you too." They looked at each other for a long moment, and Gretta felt the weight of what was happening between them, this slow building thing that had no name yet, but was undeniably real. She had never felt this way about anyone before, this pull toward another person, this desire to be near them not for practical reasons but just because their presence made the world feel different, better, more complete. "Yoren," she said quietly, "your survey. The road. Have you finished mapping the route?" His expression shuddered slightly. "Most of it. I need another few weeks of measurements and then I will have enough to draw the final maps, and the road will go through the winter grounds. According to the specifications I was given, yes. The Eastern Valley is the best route for a road, flattest terrain, easiest construction." Gretta felt cold despite the fire. "So you will finish the survey, send in your maps, and they will build a road that destroys the only safe place my people have to winter. And you are doing this knowing what it will mean. I am doing the job I was hired to do. That is not good enough." She heard the anger in her own voice and could not stop it. "You know what this will cost. You cannot hide behind following orders." Yoren's jaw tightened. "What do you want me to do, Gretta? Refuse to complete the survey? They will just hire someone else. The road is going to happen whether I map it or not. You could change the route, find another way." "There is no other way, not through this terrain. The Eastern Valley is the only viable option." He stood up, agitation breaking through his usual stillness. "Do you think I like this? Knowing that my work will hurt you, hurt your people. I hate it, but I am a surveyor. I measure land and report what I find. I do not make policy or decide where roads go, I just do the technical work. And if that technical work causes harm, you wash your hands of responsibility. What else can I do?" He turned to face her fully, and she saw frustration and pain in his expression. "This is my livelihood, Gretta. Surveying is all I know, all I am trained for. If I refuse this job, I lose my reputation, my income, everything I have built. I cannot just throw that away. Even for people who will suffer because of it, even for that. I am not a hero. I am just a man trying to make a living. Gretta stood as well, facing him across the small space. Then, what is this? She gestured between them. What have we been doing these past months if you are still going to complete a survey that destroys my people's winter ground? I do not know, Yoren said, and his voice was raw in a way she had never heard. I do not know what this is. All I know is that I have never felt this way about anyone, and the thought of you hating me makes me feel sick, but I still have to do my job. That is reality. Reality is that you are choosing your job over me, over us, over any chance we might have had. It is not that simple. It is exactly that simple. They stared at each other, the fire crackling between them, and Gretta felt something breaking apart in her chest. She had been foolish to think this could work, foolish to let herself care about a human, about someone whose work was built on the erasure of her people. The gloves on the table seemed to mock her now, a stupid game that had distracted her from the truth. She walked to the door and pulled it open, letting in the cold night air. Finish your survey, Yoren Vane. Draw your maps, but do not come to my hut again. We are done with trades. Gretta, wait. But she was already gone, walking into the darkness, leaving him standing in his cabin with two gloves that belonged to neither of them. The next few weeks were bitter in ways that had nothing to do with weather. Gretta threw herself into her work, checking traps with fierce attention, hunting with single-minded focus. She saw Yoren twice from a distance, working on his survey, and each time she turned and went the other way. The gloves stayed in her hut, and she thought about throwing them away, burning them, anything to rid herself of the reminder. But she could not bring herself to do it. She went to the trading post in early spring and found some of her people there, families coming down from their scattered winter camps. Her cousin Raka was among them, a broad-shouldered woman with more traditional orc features than Gretta's willowy build. "You look terrible," Raka said bluntly. "What has been eating at you?" Gretta helped her load supplies onto a sledge. "Nothing, just a hard winter. You have had hard winters before, this is different." Raka studied her with sharp eyes. "Is it the road?" Gretta's hands stilled on the ropes. "You know about the road. Everyone knows. The humans have been talking about it at the post for weeks. A new road through the Eastern Valley, bringing settlements, opening up the territory." Raka's expression was grim. "Opening it up for humans anyway. For us, it means losing the winter grounds. Have the elders decided what to do?" "What can they do? This land is not recognized as ours by human law. We have no claim they respect. They can build wherever they want." Raka secured the last of the supplies. "Some families are already talking about moving farther north into the deep mountains. But that is harder country, less game. We will lose people to cold and hunger." Gretta felt fury rising in her throat. "This is not right." "No, but since when has right mattered?" That night, Gretta lay in her hut and thought about everything she was about to lose. Not just the winter grounds that her mother had brought her to every year, not just the gathering place where her people found safety and community, but also the stupid, fragile thing that had been growing between her and Yoren. She had told herself she was done with him, that his choice had made continuing impossible. But the hurt she felt was not the clean pain of something finished. It was the messy ache of something broken that she still wanted to fix. She thought about what he had said, that the Eastern Valley was the only viable route. Was that true? She knew the land as well as anyone, maybe better. Her mother had taught her to read terrain, to understand the shapes the world made and why. The Eastern Valley was flat and easy, yes. But there were other ways through the mountains. Harder ways, more expensive to build but possible. If Yoren could not see those routes, maybe she could show him. The question was whether showing him would change anything, or whether he would still choose the easier path, the one that followed orders and protected his reputation and left her people without shelter. The question was whether he cared enough about her, about them, to make the harder choice. Gretta got up and walked to the shelf where the gloves sat. She picked them up, feeling their weight, thinking about the strange trade that had brought them together. She had kept his glove like a trophy because something in her had wanted to keep a piece of him close. She had traded for the other one because she wanted an excuse to see him again. The whole foolish game had been her way of circling around the truth she had not been ready to speak, that she wanted him in her life. She put the gloves in her pack and left the hut, walking through the spring darkness toward Yoren's cabin. He was awake when she arrived, sitting at his table with maps spread out in front of him, a candle burning low. He looked up when she knocked, and the expression on his face when he saw her was complicated. Hope and wariness and something like relief. "Gretta, can I come in?" Of course. She entered the cabin and set her pack on the floor. The maps on the table showed the territory in careful detail, elevation lines and markers she did not fully understand but could read well enough. The route through the eastern valley was marked in dark ink, a clean line through the flattest terrain. "I want to show you something," she said. Yoren stood up, watching her carefully. "All right. Not now. In the morning. It will require traveling, and it is too dark to navigate safely now." "Where are we going?" To see another way. Understanding dawned in his eyes. "Another route for the road, maybe. I do not know if it will work, but I know the land, and I think there might be a possibility you have not seen." She met his gaze. "If you are willing to look." Yoren was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I am willing." They left at first light, Gretta leading and Yoren following with his instruments. She took him west from the pass, into country she knew but he had not surveyed yet. The terrain was rougher here, all steep slopes and narrow defiles, and she could feel his skepticism as they climbed. "This is not road country," he said after an hour of hard walking. "Not here. Farther on." She led him through a series of switchbacks to a ridge that looked out over a long valley running north to south, parallel to the eastern route but higher and narrower. It was not as flat as the other valley, but it was not impossible either. A road here would require more work, more cutting and filling, but it could be done. "This valley connects to the main pass 2 miles north of where your current route goes," Gretta said. "It is harder terrain, but it avoids the winter grounds entirely." Yoren set down his pack and pulled out his instruments, sighting along the valley, making notes. She watched him work, seeing the concentration in his face, the way he was truly considering what she was showing him. After an hour of measurements, he sat down on a rock and looked at his notes. "It is possible. It would be more expensive, take longer to build. The territorial office will not like it, but it is possible." "Yes, it is possible." He looked up at her. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because I want there to be a way for both things to be true. For you to do your work and for my people to keep the winter grounds. I do not want to choose between you and them. I do not want you to have to choose either." They looked at each other across the distance of the rock and snow between them, and Gretta felt the weight of everything unspoken. Then Yoren stood and walked to her, closing the gap, and when he reached her, he took her hands in his. "If I recommend this route, I will have to argue for it. Defend it against cheaper, easier options. The territorial office might reject it anyway, or they might question my judgment, hurt my reputation." His hands tightened on hers. "But you are right. I cannot hide behind just following orders, not when I know the harm it will cause. Not when it hurts you." Gretta felt something loosen in her chest, a knot she had been carrying for weeks. "You will change the route. I will try. I cannot promise they will accept it, but I can make the argument, show them that this is viable. It is the right thing to do." He lifted one hand to her face, touching her cheek gently. "I am sorry I did not see it before. Sorry I was ready to prioritize my convenience over your people's survival. You see it now. That is what matters." They stood together in the cold spring air, and then Yoren leaned down and kissed her, gentle and careful, and Gretta kissed him back with all the pent-up longing of the long winter. When they broke apart, they were both smiling. "We should finish the measurements," Yoren said. "If I am going to argue for this route, I need complete data." They spent the next 3 days surveying the Western Valley together, Yoren taking measurements and Gretta guiding him through the terrain, showing him the places where a road could be cut without too much difficulty, where bridges could be built, where the grade was manageable. It was hard work, but they did it side by side, and in the evenings they returned to Yoren's cabin and made plans. "I will need to redraw all the maps," he said one night, surrounded by papers. "Submit a full report justifying the route change. How long will that take? 2 weeks, maybe 3. Then I have to travel to the territorial office and present it in person." He rubbed his eyes, tired. "They will not be happy. The Western route is more expensive, but you have the data to show it is sound." "Yes. And I will argue that the social costs of the Eastern route outweigh the financial savings. Displacing an entire population, creating conflict, those things have costs too." He looked at her. "I do not know if they will listen, but you will try." "I will try." Gretta moved around the table and wrapped her arms around him from behind, resting her chin on his shoulder. "That is all I can ask." The next few weeks passed in a blur of work. Yoren spent long hours redrawing maps and writing his report, making the case for the Western route with careful logic and detailed evidence. Gretta helped where she could, describing the winter grounds and the patterns of her people, giving him the information he needed to argue the human cost of the Eastern route. Between the work, they grew closer. The careful distance they had maintained before dissolved into something warmer, more open. They kissed often, touched easily, learned the shapes of each other's bodies and minds. Gretta had never been in love before and did not have words for what she felt, but she knew it was real and deep and worth protecting. When the maps were finally finished, Yoren prepared to travel to the territorial office. It was a 3-day journey south, and he would need to stay for at least a week to present his case and wait for a decision. "Will you be all right while I am gone?" he asked the night before he left. "I have been living alone for 5 years. I think I can manage a few weeks." "I know." "I just worry." Gretta kissed him. "I will be fine. Go make them listen." He left at dawn, his pack loaded with maps and reports, and Gretta watched him disappear down the mountain trail with a mixture of hope and fear. Everything they wanted depended on humans she had never met making a choice that went against their own economic interests. It felt like a fragile hope to hang their future on. She went back to her traps and her work, trying to keep busy, but the days dragged. She checked the trails more often than necessary, hoping to see Yoren returning early with good news. But 2 weeks passed with no sign of him. On the 16th day, Gretta was at the trading post selling pelts when she heard raised voices outside. She went to see what the commotion was about and found a group of humans from a nearby settlement arguing with Raka and 2 other orcs. "You people need to understand," one of the humans was saying, a large man with an aggressive stance. "The road is happening. It is already approved. You cannot stop progress." "The road was supposed to go through different land," Raka said, her voice controlled but angry. "We were told the route had been changed." The human laughed. "Changed? On whose authority? The territorial office approved the original survey, the Eastern Valley route. Construction starts in 2 months. Gretta felt the world tilt. What? The human turned to her. You heard me. The Eastern route is approved. You orcs need to clear out of the winter grounds by summer's end. That is not possible. The surveyor was presenting an alternate route. A Western Valley route that avoids the winter grounds. I do not know anything about that. All I know is what the territorial office announced. Eastern route approved and funded. The man's expression was smug. You should start packing. Gretta pushed past him and ran toward Yoren's cabin, her heart pounding. She found it empty, no sign that he had returned. She stood in the middle of the small room trying to understand what had happened. Had he even presented the alternate route? Had they rejected it? Had he changed his mind? She waited at the cabin through the night and into the next day. Finally, in the late afternoon, she saw a figure coming up the trail. Yoren. He looked exhausted, his clothes dusty from hard travel, his face drawn. When he saw her waiting, something complicated crossed his expression. Gretta. Tell me it is not true. Tell me they did not approve the Eastern route. Yoren set down his pack slowly. I presented the Western route. I gave them all the data, made every argument I could think of. I explained the displacement, the cost to the orc population, everything. And they rejected it. Said the financial cost was too high, that orc migration patterns were not their concern, that the Eastern route was more practical. His voice was flat, defeated. They approved the original survey and authorized construction. Gretta felt something breaking inside her. So that is it. Your maps, your work, it destroys the winter grounds and you just accept it. I did not just accept it. Anger flared in his voice, the first real heat she had heard from him. I fought for 2 weeks. I argued until they stopped listening. I compromised my standing with the office, probably damaged my reputation permanently, but they would not budge. Then you should have pushed harder. I pushed as hard as I could. What else was I supposed to do? Sabotage the project, refuse to turn in the maps. That would not have stopped anything. They would have just hired someone else and blacklisted me from ever working again. Maybe that would have been worth it. Yoren stared at her. You are asking me to destroy my entire career, my livelihood, for a cause that is already lost. The road is happening, Gretta, with or without my maps. That is reality. Reality is that you chose your career over my people, over me. That is not fair. I tried. I really tried. Trying is not enough when the result is the same as if you had not tried at all. They stood facing each other, and Gretta saw the moment Yoren's expression hardened, the walls going up. What do you want from me? I am one surveyor. I do not have the power to stop territorial expansion or change government policy. I did what I could within the limits of what is actually possible. You had the power to refuse, to walk away, and achieve nothing except ruining my own life. That is not noble, Gretta. That is just stupid. The word hung between them, sharp and ugly. Gretta felt tears burning in her eyes, but she would not let them fall. I was stupid to think you would choose differently. Stupid to think a human could care more about what is right than about what is convenient. Do not make this about me being human. This is about reality, about the limits of what one person can do against an entire system. Then we have nothing more to say to each other. Gretta turned and walked out of the cabin, and this time Yoren did not call after her. She made her way back to her hut through blurring vision, and when she got there, she finally let herself cry, great gasping sobs that tore through her chest. She had been foolish to hope, foolish to trust, foolish to think that love could bridge the gap between their worlds. The gloves were still on her shelf, mocking her with their silent presence. She grabbed them and threw them into the fire, watching the leather catch and burn. It felt like burning away the last remnants of something that had never been real in the first place. But even as the gloves burned, she knew that was not true. What she and Yoren had shared was real. The problem was that reality was more complicated than feelings, and sometimes being real was not enough. 3 days later, Raka came to her hut with news. The families are meeting to decide what to do about the road. You should come. Gretta went with her to a gathering in the lower valley, where 30 or so orcs had assembled, representing most of the families that used the winter grounds. The mood was grim. People spoke of moving north into harder country, of scattering to different territories, of trying to petition human authorities who would not listen. An older man named Thorak, one of the respected elders, asked Gretta directly, "You know the surveyor, the human who mapped the route. Can he be reasoned with?" Gretta felt all eyes on her. "I thought so once, but no, he will not help us." "Did you ask him to change the route?" "Yes, he tried to argue for an alternate route that would avoid the winter grounds. But the territorial office rejected it, and he accepted their decision. So he values his job more than our survival," Raka said bitterly. "It seems that way." Thorax shook his head. "Then we have no choice but to move. I propose we begin scouting new territory to the north, see if we can establish a new gathering ground before next winter." The discussion continued, plans forming for dispersal and relocation. Gretta listened, feeling hollow. Her people were being scattered, their way of life disrupted, and she had failed to stop it. Worse, she had let herself care about the man who helped make it happen. That night she could not sleep. She kept seeing Yoren's face, the exhaustion and defeat in his expression when he had told her about the territorial office's rejection. He had tried to help, had argued for the alternate route even knowing it might damage his career. It had not been enough, but he had tried. And she had told him it did not matter, that trying without success was the same as not trying at all. Gretta sat up in her furs, staring into the darkness. Was that fair? Yoren was one person with limited power trying to work within a system designed to ignore people like her. He had pushed as hard as he could within those limits. Should she have expected him to sacrifice everything for a cause that would not be won either way? But then, if everyone accepted the limits of what was possible, nothing would ever change. Someone had to be willing to refuse, to draw a line and say this far and no farther. She did not know if she was being too harsh or not harsh enough. All she knew was that her chest ached with missing him, and that ache felt like a betrayal of her people. Morning came, gray and cold. Gretta forced herself to eat, to dress, to begin another day. She was checking her traps when she saw Yoren hiking up toward her hut. Her first instinct was to avoid him, but something made her wait. He looked terrible, like he had not slept in days. When he saw her, he stopped walking, maintaining distance. "I know you do not want to see me," he called across the snow, "but I need to tell you something." "What?" "I did not turn in the maps." Gretta went very still. "What do you mean, the final survey maps?" "The ones the construction crews need to actually build the road. I was supposed to deliver them to the territorial office before I left. I did not." He took a step closer. "I have them in my cabin. Without those maps, they cannot start construction. The route is approved, but they do not have the detailed specifications they need to actually build it." "Why? Why would you withhold them?" "Because you were right. Trying and failing is not the same as giving up." Yoren's voice was rough. "I cannot stop the policy, but I can delay implementation. Buy time for your people to organize, to make their case, to find lawyers or advocates who can argue for legal protection of the winter grounds. It is not much, but it is something. They will fire you, probably blacklist you from ever surveying again. Probably." He smiled, and it was tired but real. Turns out my career is not worth as much as I thought, not compared to doing the right thing, not compared to you. Gretta felt tears starting again, but this time they were different. Yoren, I am not asking for forgiveness. What I did, trying to just work within the system and hoping that would be enough, that was cowardice. You deserved better. Your people deserved better. He took another step closer. I cannot fix everything, but I can at least make this harder for them. Refusing to cooperate, that is something I can do. What will you do? For work, for income? I do not know yet. Figure something out. Maybe hire on with a different territorial office, somewhere my reputation has not reached yet, or learn a new trade. I am good with my hands, I can do construction or carpentry. He shrugged. I will survive. Your people need the winter grounds, I just need a job. Gretta crossed the snow between them and wrapped her arms around him, holding tight. He held her back and they stood together in the cold spring air, breathing in sync. I am sorry, she said into his shoulder. Sorry I told you trying was not enough. You were doing what you thought was right. You were right to push me to do more. I needed to be pushed. They held each other for a long time, and when they finally pulled apart, Gretta said, What happens now? Now I go back to the territorial office and tell them I made errors in the survey, that the maps are unreliable and I need to redo the work. That will buy us maybe 3 or 4 months before they realize I am stalling and fire me. In that time, your people can organize, find advocates, make noise. It might not work, but it is a chance. 3 or 4 months is not much time. No, but it is more than we had yesterday. Gretta thought about the gathering, about Thorak and Raka and all the families trying to decide where to go. I need to tell the others. We need to use this time well. I will help however I can. Information about the territorial office, how the process works, who to talk to. I might be burning my bridges with them, but I can at least use what I know to help you fight. They went together to find Raka, who listened to Yoren's plan with sharp attention. You are putting your livelihood at risk for us. Yes. Why? You are human. This does not affect you. Yoren glanced at Gretta. It affects people I care about. That makes it my concern. Raka studied him for a long moment, then nodded. All right, I will take this to the elders. We will need to organize quickly, find someone who knows human law and can argue our case. Over the next few weeks, Gretta watched her people mobilize with an efficiency that surprised her. Thorak reached out to a human lawyer in the southern settlements who had a reputation for taking difficult cases. Raka organized families to document their use of the winter grounds, creating a record of generations of occupation. Younger orcs traveled to other territories, spreading word and looking for allies. Yoren provided invaluable inside knowledge about how the territorial bureaucracy worked, who to petition, what arguments might carry weight. He spent hours teaching Thorak and others how to read survey maps, how to understand the legal language of land claims. The elders were initially suspicious of him, but as they saw his genuine commitment to helping, that suspicion slowly transformed into cautious respect. Gretta worked alongside everyone, using her knowledge of the land to help document trails, camps, hunting patterns. She and Yoren spent long hours together, working side by side, and in the quiet moments between tasks, they rebuilt what had been broken between them. I have been thinking, Yoren said one evening as they reviewed maps together. When this is over, whatever happens, I want to stay here. In the mountains, Gretta looked up from the document she was studying. Your career is in surveying. That requires traveling to wherever the work is. My career in surveying is probably over anyway, once the territorial office figures out I have been stalling. And honestly, I am all right with that. I like the work, but I do not like what it is used for most of the time. measuring land so it can be divided up and sold, helping expansion that displaces people. It does not sit right anymore. He met her eyes. I would rather do something else. Something that does not require compromising what I believe in. What would you do? I was thinking carpentry, building. There is always need for someone who can construct things properly. Or I could trap, hunt, learn to live off the land the way you do. I am a quick learner. Gretta felt warmth spreading through her chest. You would give up your whole profession to stay here. I would give it up to be where you are. If you want me here, I want you here. They kissed, and it tasted like promise, like a future that was uncertain but possible. 3 months after Yoren had withheld the maps, the lawyer Thorak had hired presented their case to a territorial judge. The argument was complex, drawing on old treaties and precedents, making the case that the winter grounds should be recognized as protected territory based on long-standing use. The territorial office fought back hard, arguing that orc occupation was informal and did not constitute legal claim. The judge took 2 weeks to decide. In those 2 weeks, Gretta barely slept. She had seen her people come together, fight for their home in ways that gave her hope. But she also knew how often human law ignored orc rights, how little power they had in a system designed without them in mind. When the decision finally came, it was not everything they had hoped for, but it was not nothing either. The judge ruled that construction of the road could not proceed until a formal survey of orc land use was completed and considered. The winter grounds were granted temporary protected status, pending further review. It was not permanent protection, but it was a delay, a breathing space, a chance to keep fighting. Raka brought the news to Gretta's hut, her expression fierce with satisfaction. We bought ourselves time, maybe a year, maybe 2. Time to keep making the case, to find more allies, to make it politically difficult for them to just bulldoze through. That is more than I thought we would get, Gretta admitted. We have your surveyor to thank for it. Without those months he bought us, we would never have organized in time. He is not my surveyor. Raka grinned, showing tusks. Right, that is why you look at him the way you do. Gretta felt her face warm. Fine, he is mine, but not just a surveyor. What is he then? I am not sure yet, but something good. That evening, the orc community held a gathering to celebrate the temporary victory and plan next steps. Yoren came at Gretta's invitation, nervous about being the only human among dozens of orcs. But Thorak greeted him warmly, and others followed suit, thanking him for the help he had provided. You sacrificed for us, Thorak said, gripping Yoren's shoulder. That is not forgotten. I did what I should have done from the start, Yoren replied. What matters is you did it. You are welcome among us, Yoren Vane. The gathering was loud and warm, full of food and conversation and relief. Gretta watched Yoren slowly relax, saw him talking with Raka about carpentry techniques, listening to children tell exaggerated stories, existing comfortably in the chaos of community. He fit here, she realized. Better than she had expected, maybe better than he had expected himself. Late in the evening, they slipped away from the gathering and walked together under stars. The spring air was still cold, but the worst of winter was past. Soon the world would turn green again. I have something for you, Yoren said, pulling a small bundle from his coat. Gretta unwrapped it and found the gloves, both of them, charred but recognizable. I burned these. I know. I fished them out of the fire pit the next day. They are pretty damaged, but I thought maybe they still meant something. She looked at the ruined gloves, thinking about the strange trade that had started everything, the excuse to see each other that had turned into something real. They do, but I do not need an excuse to see you anymore. No, I just want to see you, gloves or no gloves. Yoren smiled, and it was the most open expression she had ever seen on his usually careful face. Good, Because I want to see you too, every day if you will let me. Every day sounds right. They walked back to Gretta's hut together, and that night Yoren stayed, and the night after that, and the night after that. Slowly, his things migrated from his cabin to her hut, clothes and books and surveying instruments he no longer used. They settled into a rhythm of shared life, hunting and trapping together, making repairs to the hut, existing in the comfortable silence that had always been their natural language. Yoren found work building and repairing structures for orc families, using his skills to help improve the winter grounds. He was good at it, patient and precise, and people sought out his expertise. He would never be wealthy doing this kind of work, but it was enough, and it felt right in ways surveying for territorial expansion never had. Word eventually came from the territorial office. Yoren was officially dismissed from his position and blacklisted from future surveying work in the territory. He accepted the news with equanimity. I expected as much. Worth it. Spring turned to summer, and the temporary protection on the winter grounds held. The lawyer continued to work on building a case for permanent recognition, gathering testimonies and historical evidence. It was slow work with no guaranteed outcome, but it was work that mattered. On a warm evening in late summer, Yoren and Gretta sat outside her hut watching the sun set over the mountains. He had been quiet all day, working on something in his hands. "What are you making?" Gretta asked. He held up 2 new gloves, beautifully crafted from soft leather, lined with fur. "I was thinking about our trade, how we used to exchange gloves back and forth, neither of us keeping them. I remember. I thought maybe we could make a different trade now." He handed her both gloves. "These are yours, made for your hands, properly sized. No more excuses, no more games." "Just a gift." Gretta took the gloves, feeling the quality of the work. They were perfect, exactly what she needed. "What do I give you in return?" Yoren reached into his pocket and pulled out a small carved figure, a bird with wings spread. "You made this." "I found it in your hut months ago, and I have been carrying it around ever since. It reminds me of you, the way you move through the world with this quiet grace. You want to trade gloves for a carving I made when I was 16? No." Yoren took a breath. "I want to trade for the chance to keep finding your carvings in our shared space, for mornings waking up next to you, for building a life together, here in these mountains, for as long as you will have me." Gretta set the gloves down carefully and took his hands in hers. "That is a very uneven trade, Yoren Vane. Gloves for a whole life together." "Is it? I think I am getting the better end of it. I think I am." They kissed as the sun dipped below the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. When they pulled apart, Gretta was smiling. "So is that a yes?" Yoren asked. "That is a yes, to all of it. Life together here for as long as we both want it. I will want it for a very long time. Good, so will I." They sat together watching the stars emerge, holding hands, existing in the quiet space they had built between them. The future was uncertain, the fight for the winter grounds far from over, but they would face it together. That felt like enough. Over the following year, the lawyer made progress on the land claim, building a coalition of support that included human advocates, scholars, and even a few sympathetic territorial officials. The case became something of a cause, drawing attention to the broader question of indigenous orc rights in the expanding territories. It was slow, frustrating work, but momentum was building. Yoren and Gretta's relationship deepened into something solid and enduring. They learned each other's rhythms, the ways they fit together and the ways they differed. Yoren taught Gretta to read and write in the human script, opening up books and documents she had never been able to access before. Gretta taught Yoren to track and hunt, to read weather and terrain with the instinctive knowledge her mother had passed down. They talked about making things permanent, about some kind of formal commitment, but both were uncertain how to navigate that in a world where human-orc partnerships had no recognized legal status. In the end, they created their own ceremony, speaking promises to each other on a clear winter night with Thorak and Raka as witnesses. "I promise to stand beside you in whatever comes," Yoren said, holding Gretta's hands. "To choose you and your people, to build a life that honors what matters." "I promise to trust you even when it is hard," Gretta replied. "To see you for who you are, not what you are. To build something new with you, something that is ours alone." They exchanged gifts. Yoren gave Gretta a new knife he had forged himself, the handle carved with mountain patterns. Gretta gave Yoren a warm cloak she had made, lined with the pelts of animals she had trapped. Practical gifts, useful gifts, the kind of things that said, "I want you to be safe and warm in the life we are building." Afterward, they held a small gathering at Yoren's old cabin, which they had repaired and expanded to serve as their shared home, larger than Gretta's hut, but still close to the mountain she loved. Friends came from the orc community, and even a few humans from the trading post who had come to respect the odd partnership. It was not a large celebration, but it was warm and real, full of good food and genuine affection. Winter came again, and this time the winter grounds were full of families secure in the knowledge that, for now at least, they were protected. The lawyer continued working on permanent recognition, but even without that final victory, life went on. Children played in the snow, hunters brought in game, families gathered around fires and told stories. Gretta and Yoren settled into the rhythms of winter together, checking trap lines and maintaining their home, reading by firelight and making plans for spring. Sometimes Gretta would look at Yoren and marvel at how far they had come from that first meeting in the snow, from the strange trade of gloves that made no sense to anyone but them. On a particularly cold night in deep winter, Yoren pulled something from a drawer and set it on the table between them. The two gloves, charred and damaged from the fire Gretta had thrown them into a year and a half ago. "I have been thinking we should do something with these," he said. Gretta picked up one of the gloves, feeling the stiff, burned leather. "Like what? I do not know. They are too damaged to wear, but they started everything. Seems wrong to just throw them away. We could keep them, put them on a shelf somewhere." Together, Gretta agreed. They were always supposed to be together, even when we were trading them back and forth. Yoren found a small wooden box and lined it with cloth, and they placed the gloves inside, arranged carefully side by side. The box went on a shelf above their bed, a reminder of the strange beginning that had led them here. "Do you ever regret it?" Yoren asked. "Getting involved with a human, all the complications that brought." Gretta thought about it seriously, because he deserved a serious answer. "No. I regret that the world makes it complicated, but I do not regret you. You are the best thing that has happened to me. Even though I almost destroyed the winter grounds. You did not, though. In the end, you chose differently. That is what matters." She touched his face gently. "And you keep choosing right. Every day. That means everything." They made love that night with the tenderness of deep familiarity, and afterward lay tangled together under warm furs, listening to the wind howl outside their solid walls. Spring came with the rushing sound of snow melt and the return of green to the high meadows. The lawyer sent word that the territorial judge was preparing a final ruling on the winter grounds case. It had been nearly 2 years since Yoren had first withheld the survey maps. 2 years of legal arguments and political maneuvering and community organizing. When the ruling came, it was more than anyone had dared hope for. The winter grounds were granted permanent protected status, recognized as traditional orc territory with legal standing. New development would be prohibited, and the orc community was given formal rights to the land they had used for generations. The road project was officially cancelled, and alternate routes were mandated to avoid not just the winter grounds but other areas of orc habitation throughout the territory. The celebration that followed was enormous, the largest gathering Gretta had ever seen in the winter grounds. Families came from all over the territory, hundreds of orcs gathering to mark the victory. There was music and dancing, feasting and storytelling, a release of years of tension and fear. Thorak made a speech thanking everyone who had fought for this outcome, and he specifically called out Yoren, asking him to stand and be recognized. This human could have taken the easy path, Thorak said, his voice carrying across the crowd. He could have finished his survey and moved on, collecting his pay and leaving us to suffer the consequences. Instead, he chose to stand with us, to sacrifice his career and his standing to buy us time. He gave us the chance to fight, and that fight led us here. Yoren Vane, you are brother to this community and you always will be. The crowd cheered, and Gretta saw tears in Yoren's eyes as he nodded acknowledgement. She squeezed his hand, proud beyond words. Later, when the celebration had mellowed into smaller conversations around scattered fires, Raka found them sitting together at the edge of the gathering. "You two look happy," she observed. "We are," Gretta said simply. "Good, you deserve it." Raka settled down beside them. "Thorak is organizing a council to oversee the winter grounds now that we have legal standing. He asked if you would be part of it, Gretta. Use your knowledge of the high country to help plan sustainable use. I am not much for meetings and politics. You do not have to be political. Just know the land and care about its future. That is enough." Raka glanced at Yoren. "You too, if you want. Someone who understands how human legal systems work would be useful." Yoren looked surprised. "I am not orc. Are you sure the community would want me involved in governance? You bled for us when it mattered. You are as much part of this community as anyone, more than some who were born to it." Raka stood up, brushing off her clothes. "Think about it. Let Thorak know." After she left, Gretta and Yoren sat in silence for a while, watching the fires burn down. "Would you want to do it?" Gretta asked. "Be part of the council? I think so. It would be good work, helping manage the land sustainably, making sure the legal protections hold." He looked at her. "But only if you do it too. I do not want to spend all my time in meetings while you are up in the mountains. We could do both. Council work in winter when everyone is gathered, then back to our life in the high country during warmer months. That sounds perfect." They joined the council, and over the next few years helped establish governance structures for the winter grounds, balancing traditional orc practices with the legal frameworks that protected them under human law. It was challenging work, requiring patience and diplomacy, but it mattered. They were building something that would last beyond their own lives, protecting this place for future generations. Their personal life settled into a comfortable pattern. Winters in the winter grounds, involved in community and council work. Spring through fall in their mountain home, trapping and hunting and maintaining the quiet life they both loved. They were part of something larger now while still preserving the solitude that fed them. 3 years after the winter grounds were protected, Greta realized she was pregnant. The knowledge hit her with a mixture of joy and terror. She had never particularly thought about children, had assumed her solitary life would not include them. But Yoren had changed everything about her life, so why not this too? She told him on a clear summer evening, watching his face carefully for his reaction. He was quiet for a long moment, processing. Then a smile spread across his face, wide and genuine and full of wonder. "Really, really, we are going to be parents, apparently." Yoren laughed and pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. That is terrifying and amazing. It is, Greta agreed. I have no idea what I am doing. We will figure it out together. Their daughter was born in early spring, a healthy baby with green skin and small budding tusks, her father's gray eyes and her mother's pointed ears. They named her Kara, a name that meant beloved in the old Orc language Greta's mother had taught her. Kara transformed their lives in ways both exhausting and beautiful. Yoren proved to be a patient, attentive father, and Greta found depths of protectiveness and love she had not known existed. They adjusted their routines, taking turns with night feedings and childcare, learning as they went. The Orc community embraced Kara with warmth, and Greta saw her daughter growing up with something she herself had never had, a true sense of belonging to a larger whole. Kara would know both her human and Orc heritage, would grow up in a world where the winter grounds were protected, and her parents' love was not shameful or hidden but celebrated. 2 years after Kara was born, Greta found herself pregnant again. This time it was less shocking, though no less transformative. Their second daughter, Jessa, was born with more human features than Orc, but the green tint to her skin and the slight points to her ears marked her mixed heritage clearly. With 2 young children, life became busy in new ways. The mountain home was full of noise and mess and constant activity. Greta sometimes missed the quiet solitude of her earlier life, but not seriously. This chaos had its own richness. Yoren expanded their home, adding a second room for the girls to share, building furniture sized for small hands. He was good at this work, at creating spaces that were both functional and full of care. Greta taught the girls to read the mountain the way her mother had taught her, starting simple with weather and animal tracks. The years passed in a blur of growth and change. Kara grew into a curious, bold child who wanted to know how everything worked. Jessa was quieter, more contemplative, with a talent for drawing that showed up early. They were different from each other but close, the way Greta had always imagined siblings might be. Greta and Yoren's relationship matured into something deep and steady, the excitement of early love transforming into the profound comfort of true partnership. They still had their moments of friction, disagreements about how to handle child rearing or community obligations, but they had learned to navigate conflict with honesty and respect. On their 10th anniversary of making promises to each other, they stood together on the ridge where Greta had first shown Yoren the alternate route for the road. The winter grounds spread out below them, full of life and permanence. "You remember standing here?" Greta asked. "When I brought you to see the Western Valley, I remember. I was so certain the eastern route was the only option, and you showed me I was wrong." Yoren put his arm around her shoulders. "You showed me a lot of things I was wrong about." "Like what?" "Like thinking I had to choose between doing good work and making a living. Like believing one person could not make a difference against large systems. Like assuming I understood the limits of what was possible." He kissed her temple. "You expanded my whole world. You expanded mine too. Showed me that not all humans are the same, that trust can be earned, that love can bridge gaps I thought were unbridgeable." They stood together in the cold spring air, watching their daughters play in the snow below, supervised by Raka, who had volunteered to give them time alone. Kara was building something ambitious with snow blocks while Jessa drew patterns in fresh powder with a stick. Their voices carried up the mountainside, high and clear and full of joy. "We made something good here," Yoren said quietly. "We did. I know it was not always easy. The fights with the territorial office, the prejudice we still face sometimes, raising children who do not quite fit in either world. But we made it work. We are still making it work." Greta leaned into his warmth. "And I would choose this every time." Choose you, choose our girls, choose this life we built from nothing. Even if you could go back, have an easier path, especially then. Easy is not better. This is better. They returned to the winter grounds as the sun began to set, collecting their daughters and heading home. The cabin was warm and welcoming, the fire already laid by Raka before she left. They made dinner together, Kara helping in her enthusiastic if messy way while Jessa set the table with careful precision. After the girls were asleep, Greta and Yoren sat by the fire with tea, enjoying the quiet. Greta went to the shelf and took down the small wooden box, opening it to reveal the two gloves, still charred and damaged, still paired together. "I have been thinking," she said. "We should tell the girls the story of these, how we met, the trade we made, all of it. They might not understand." The glove trade was pretty nonsensical. That is the point. Love is nonsensical sometimes. It does not follow logic or practical thinking, it just is. Greta touched one of the gloves gently. "I want them to know that their parents started with something strange and made it into something beautiful. That even when the world tells you something is impossible, you can create your own possibility." Yoren smiled and added another log to the fire. "That is a good story to tell them." "It is our story. It is." They sat together in the firelight, holding hands, and outside the winter ground settled into night, peaceful and protected, full of life and promise. The gloves stayed in their box on the shelf, a reminder of the strange trade that had started everything, the foolish choice to keep a lost glove like a trophy, the equally foolish choice to return it only in exchange for the other. Two gloves, neither worn, both cherished, finally paired together in the home Greta and Yoren had built. A home full of love and noise and the quiet moments between. A home that was exactly what they had needed, even when neither of them had known to look for it. The road that might have destroyed the winter grounds was never built. The route Yoren had surveyed sat forgotten in territorial office files, replaced by the protections he had fought for, and the community had secured. The mountains remained wild and open, home to orc families and the occasional human who proved themselves worth trusting. And in a small cabin built into the mountainside, two people from different worlds slept peacefully, their children safe in the next room, their future uncertain but faced together. The gloves that had brought them together sat on a shelf above their bed, silent witnesses to the strange and beautiful thing they had created from an excuse that made no sense, and a love that made all the sense in the world. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft and steady, covering the mountains in fresh white. In the spring, it would melt and the world would turn green, and the cycle would continue as it always had. But now the winter grounds were safe, protected not just by law but by the community that had fought for them, and by the surveyor who had chosen people over policy, love over career, what was right over what was easy. Yoren Vane and Gretta Bane had built a life together from gloves and snow, and the quiet understanding that sometimes the most important trades are the ones that make no practical sense. They had started with a trophy kept for no good reason, and ended with a family, a home, and a future that belonged entirely to them. And that, they both agreed on the rare occasions they spoke of such things, was the best trade either of them had ever made.